Oh, what a haunting Friday it was in Jerusalem, a day so heavy with destiny, it seemed the very air trembled. Can you picture it? The sky churned with ominous clouds swirling over Golgotha, like a divine audience holding its breath, waiting for a moment so profound it would cleave history itself in two. At the base of three rugged, splintered crosses stood a Roman centurion, his heart forged in the fires of unflinching duty, his soul scarred by years of violence. His name Longinus. His mission to ensure the death of a man named Jesus of Nazareth. Just another crucifixion, right? Or so he thought, standing there in his polished armor, his spear gleaming under the shadowed sun. How could he have known that this day would unravel everything he believed? The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as the sixth hour draped the land in an eerie, unnatural darkness that seemed to cling to every soul until the ninth hour. What was happening? Was the world itself mourning? Suddenly a cry tore through the silence. Jesus, his voice raw with anguish, called out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Those words, oh, they pierced the air like a blade, cutting into the hearts of all who heard them. And then with one final thunderous cry that seemed to shake the heavens, Jesus breathed his last. Can you feel the earth tremble beneath your feet? In that very instant, the temple veil tore in two from top to bottom, as if the heavens themselves wailed in grief. And Longinus, standing there, facing the man he'd been ordered to kill, felt his world shift, his heart lurch. His voice, steady yet trembling with awe, broke the silence. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Who could have predicted such a confession from a hardened soldier? That day, Longinus's life was irrevocably transformed, turned upside down in a way he could never have imagined. The man who'd driven a spear into Jesus' side, who'd overseen his execution with the cold mechanical precision of a Roman officer, was shaken to the very core of his being. Can you imagine the turmoil in his heart, the storm raging within? He went from executioner to witness, from a soldier of Rome's iron will to the first Gentile to proclaim Jesus as the Son of God. He abandoned his prestigious rank in the mightiest empire on earth. Think of the power he held, the respect he commanded, and joined the followers of the man he'd once pierced. With a fire blazing in his soul, he carried the gospel to distant lands, preaching with the fervor of someone who'd seen it all, whose life had been reborn in the shadow of the cross. Yet his story, as glorious as it began, would end in tragedy etched into church history under the name Longinus. Oh, how bittersweet is that legacy, a tale of redemption and sacrifice that echoes through the ages. Before that fateful Friday, Longinus was every inch a Roman centurion, a towering figure of authority and strength. These were no ordinary soldiers. Centurions commanded legions, each leading over 100 men. With iron discipline, their orders obeyed without question. Admired for their courage, feared for their ruthlessness, they were the backbone of Rome's war machine, the enforcers of an empire that spanned continents. Longinus embodied this life-toughness, violence, and unwavering loyalty to the empire. To rise to centurion brute strength wasn't enough. You needed cunning strategy and a heart steeled against mercy, a heart that could watch men die without flinching. Longinus had it all. His world was one of order, discipline, and blind obedience. Death, he'd seen it countless times, his eyes cold as stone. Orders, he executed them without a second thought, his hands steady, his will unbreakable. He was Rome's instrument, a man carved by years of bloodshed, his armor a second skin, his spear an extension of his iron resolve. But was he truly prepared for what awaited him on that dark, fateful day, that morning? Jerusalem buzzed with an uneasy energy, a city on the edge of something monumental. The streets hadn't fully awakened yet. Hurried footsteps echoed through the narrow alleys, and hushed voices whispered a name that seemed to carry a strange, almost sacred power, Jesus of Nazareth. Can you hear the murmurs, the tension in the air? The night before, in the shadowed, olive-scented Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had been arrested, betrayed by a kiss from Judas Iscariot, one of his own disciples. Can you believe it? For 30 pieces of silver, mere coins, Judas sold his teacher, his friend, to the authorities. Dragged before the Sanhedrin, the council of chief priests, Jesus faced accusations of blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God. They didn't hold back. They beat him, their fists raining down with hatred. They spat on him, their contempt dripping like venom, and they condemned him without a shred of mercy. But their power had limits. Only Rome could sentence a man to death. So as dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gold and gray, they hauled Jesus before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, a man whose word could mean life or death. Picture Pilate seated at his judgment seat, his eyes narrowing as he studied this quiet, unassuming prisoner. "Are you the king of the Jews?" he asked, his tone laced with curiosity, perhaps even a hint of mockery. Jesus' reply was calm, almost otherworldly, as if he stood in a realm beyond Pilate's reach. "You have said so." The chief priests and elders hurled accusations, their voices dripping with venom, each word a lash meant to wound. But Jesus, he stood silent, his silence louder than their shouts. Pilate, thrown off by this stoic demeanor, pressed him. "Don't you hear what they're saying? Aren't you going to defend yourself?" Nothing. Not a single plea, not a flicker of protest. Pilate was stunned. Can you imagine his confusion? He'd seen men beg, lie, or weep to save their skins, men who'd do anything to escape the cross. But this man radiated an unshakable calm, a strength that seemed to defy the chaos around him. What kind of man was this? Just then a messenger burst into the scene, his steps urgent, his face pale. He carried a note from Pilate's wife, and oh, what a message it was. "Have nothing to do with this innocent man," she warned, her words trembling with fear. "For I have suffered greatly today in a dream because of him." Can you imagine the chill that ran down Pilate's spine, the weight of those words pressing on his conscience? He shifted in his seat, his unease growing, sensing something vast and unstoppable unfolding before him, something he could neither control nor comprehend. The Passover custom offered a way out, release one prisoner to the crowd. Pilate seized the chance, presenting a stark choice: Jesus, the quiet teacher, or Barabbas, a notorious murderer whose name struck fear in the hearts of Jerusalem's people. Surely they'd choose the gentle teacher over a killer, right? But the priests and leaders had already poisoned the crowd's hearts, their words like venom spreading through the mob. Their voices rose in a furious chant, a tidal wave of hatred: "Release Barabbas." Pilate, desperate to maintain control, raised his hands, his voice straining over the din. "Then what shall I do with Jesus?" he shouted, his eyes searching the crowd. The response was deafening, a storm of rage that shook the very stones of the city. "Crucify him," Pilate, his unease now a gnawing dread, tried again. "Why? What evil has he done?" But the crowd's fury only swelled their cries like a tempest. "Crucify him, crucify." Powerless against this torrent of hatred, Pilate made his choice, though it tore at his soul. He called for a basin of water, and before the roaring mob washed his hands, his voice heavy with resignation. "I am innocent of this righteous man's blood. His fate is on you." With that, he released Barabbas, a murderer set free, and handed Jesus over to be crucified. The Son of God's path to the cross was set sealed in that moment of betrayal and surrender. Oh, how heavy that decision must have weighed on Pilate's heart, how it must have haunted him. In the quiet hours of the night, the soldiers dragged Jesus into the praetorium, their hands rough, their faces twisted with cruel amusement. And there at the entrance stood Longinus, as resolute as ever, his presence commanding respect. He'd overseen countless punishments, watched men break under Rome's unrelenting cruelty, their screams fading into the dust. But this day it felt different, as if the air itself carried a weight he couldn't name. Jesus offered no resistance, no screams, no curses, no pleas for mercy. He bore each blow with a purpose Longinus couldn't fathom, a quiet strength that seemed to defy the brutality around him. The soldiers, reveling in their power, stripped Jesus of his clothes and bound him tightly to a pillar, the cold stone biting into his skin. The whip cracked through the air, its leather thongs tearing flesh with every merciless strike, leaving trails of blood that stained the ground. Yet Jesus remained silent, his silence a deafening rebuke to their cruelty. Can you imagine the weight of that silence, how it hung in the air like a challenge? Longinus stood, arms crossed, his face etched with the scars of a violent life, a face that had seen too much death to be moved. But something in his eyes began to flicker, a spark of doubt, perhaps, or awe. Was this man truly just another criminal? The soldiers' mockery grew vicious, their laughter sharp and biting. They draped a purple robe over Jesus' shoulders, the fabric mocking royalty, and twisted a crown of thorns, its cruel spikes glinting in the dim light. They pressed it cruelly onto his head, while driving the thorns deep into his flesh. Blood streamed down his face, tracing paths through the dust and sweat. Yet his eyes, oh, those eyes remained steady, unshaken, filled with a compassion that seemed to see into the souls of his tormentors. They thrust a stick into his hands, a mock scepter, and knelt before him, their voices dripping with scorn as they sneered, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Their laughter echoed through the praetorium, a cruel chorus that mocked both Jesus and the very idea of his kingship. But Longinus didn't join in. He watched his heart stirring with an unease he hadn't felt in years, not from the violence which was as familiar to him as breathing, but from the quiet dignity of this broken man. The soldiers spat on Jesus, struck his head with a stick, each blow sending fresh streams of blood down his face. When their cruel game grew tiresome, they ripped off the robe, the fabric tearing at his wounds, and dressed him in his own clothes, now tattered and stained. They readied him for the cross, their movements brisk, efficient, as if this were just another day's work. But for Longinus, it was anything but. He couldn't tear his eyes away from Jesus, from the man who bore such suffering with a grace that defied comprehension. Something deep within Longinus, something long buried beneath layers of duty and bloodshed, began to awaken. Why didn't this man fight back? Why, in the face of such brutal humiliation, was there no hatred in his eyes? Only a profound, heartbreaking compassion that seemed to embrace even those who tormented him. While the soldiers laughed, their voices harsh and mocking, Longinus's mind churned with questions, each one sharper than the last. Who was this man truly? He didn't know yet, but soon, oh so soon, he would witness the greatest act of love the world had ever known, a love that would shatter his world and rebuild it anew. The soldiers seized Jesus, their hands rough as they shoved him out of the praetorium. Onto his shoulders they heaved a rough, heavy cross, its wood stained with the blood and sweat of countless others who'd walked this path before. The grim march to Golgotha began, each step a testament to the cruelty of Rome's justice. Longinus strode at the front, his duty clear, laid the prisoner to the place of execution. Golgotha, the hill of skulls, loomed ahead, a desolate, windswept place where Rome sent its enemies to die in agony, their bodies left as a warning to others. The crowd pressed in their shouts, a cacophony of hatred, a storm of voices that seemed to shake the very earth. Some spat on Jesus, their saliva mixing with the blood on his face. Others hurled insults, their words sharp with scorn, cutting deeper than any whip. Yet Jesus pressed forward, each step a struggle, his body weakened, but his spirit unbroken. Longinus, ever the disciplined centurion, cleared the path, his voice barking orders to keep the crowd at bay. But his heart was no longer just a soldier's, no longer bound solely by duty. Something had shifted, a crack forming in the armor of his resolve. As he glanced back at Jesus, staggering under the cross's crushing weight, he saw not a condemned criminal, but a man whose presence seemed to challenge everything he'd ever known. Why did this feel so different? Why did this man's suffering stir something in him that no other execution had? The questions gnawed at him, growing louder with every step toward Golgotha, each one a step closer to a truth he could feel but not yet name. The hill came into view, its stark, barren outline, a grim promise of death. The soldiers prepared the crosses, their movements practiced, efficient, as if death were merely a task to be checked off. Longinus oversaw it all, as he always had, his spear in hand, his posture rigid with authority. But his heart raced with an unfamiliar ache, a longing he couldn't explain. Jesus was nailed to the cross, the hammer's blows echoing like thunder, each one driving iron through flesh and bone. His body racked with pain. Yet even then he spoke, "Oh, can you fathom such love words of forgiveness that seemed to rise above the cruelty? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Longinus stood, watched his spear heavy in his hand, but his soul was no longer his own. It belonged to the man on the cross, to the truth he could no longer deny. When the darkness fell, swallowing the sun, when Jesus cried out in anguish, when the veil tore and the earth shook with a violence that seemed to mourn, Longinus knew. This was no ordinary man. This was the Son of God, the one whose love had pierced his heart as surely as his spear had pierced Jesus' side. From that moment, Longinus' life became a mission, a burning call he could not ignore. He left behind the empire he'd served, the rank he'd earned through years of blood and sweat, and embraced a new path, one lit by the light of the cross. He preached the gospel with a passion that could only come from witnessing the truth firsthand, his voice carrying the story of Jesus to lands far and wide, igniting hearts with the message of salvation. But the world was not kind to those who followed the cross, not in an empire that demanded loyalty above all else. Longinus's end was tragic, his name forever tied to that dark Friday when he stood at the foot of the cross and saw the light. He faced persecution, his body broken by the same empire he'd once served, yet his spirit remained unbroken, his faith a beacon in the darkness. Oh, what a journey from executioner to believer, from soldier to saint. His story, like that day, splits history in two, a testament to the power of a single moment that changed everything. A moment that showed the world what love could do, what faith could endure, what a heart transformed could achieve. Longinus the centurion who saw, believed, and gave his life for the one who died for him, his legacy lives on a fire that no darkness can extinguish, a story that calls to us all. Can you hear it? Will you answer? What a heart-wrenching scene unfolded on that desolate, windswept hill in Jerusalem. Can you even begin to grasp the weight of that moment? The air was thick with sorrow and rage, a storm of emotions swirling like the dark clouds above Golgotha. Yet amid the chaos, there were those whose silent tears spoke louder than the crowd's vicious jeers. Can you feel the ache in their hearts, the raw, unspoken pain that hung heavy in the air? Mary, the mother of Jesus, stood among them, her eyes desperately searching through the sea of hostile faces, her heart shattering with every passing second. Oh, how her soul must have screamed in agony. Unable to bear the distance from her beloved son, she turned to John, the disciple whose love for Jesus burned bright and true, and pleaded with a voice trembling with desperation, "John, please help me. Take me to my son." Together, they pushed through the surging, hateful crowd, their steps fueled by a love so fierce it could not be stopped, their hearts pounding with the urgency of reaching Jesus. But then in a moment that must have felt like a dagger to the soul, a soldier's cruel shove sent Jesus crashing to the ground. His weakened body crumpled onto the cold, unforgiving stones, the heavy cross slamming down on him with a sickening thud. Oh, how that fall must have echoed in Mary's soul, a sound she would carry for the rest of her days. It was the first time Jesus stumbled, his strength drained by the relentless brutality he'd endured, the whips, the thorns, the scorn. Can you picture the toll it took on his body? The blood streaming down his face, mingling with the dust, the soldiers, merciless in their cruelty, struck him again, their voices roaring like beasts, "Get up, move." With agonizing effort, Jesus rose, his body trembling under the weight of his wounds. But his spirit remained unbroken, a beacon of light in the darkness. Mary and John fought their way closer, their hearts breaking with every step reaching him, just as he fell a second time, his knees buckling under the cross's crushing burden. Can you imagine the torment in Mary's eyes, the unbearable grief of a mother watching her child suffer? She could hold back no longer. Rushing to his side, she knelt beside her son, her hands trembling as if they could somehow shield him from the pain, her face etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to carve her very soul. In a voice cracked by grief, barely above a whisper, she choked out, "Basket weaving. I am here, my son." Jesus, his face bloodied and bruised, lifted his gaze to meet hers, his eyes filled with a love that transcended his suffering. Softly he replied, "You see, mother, I make all things new." Those words, oh, they weren't just comfort. They were a living prophecy, a promise of the redemption about to unfold, a vow that his sacrifice would reshape the world. But the cross, that cruel, unyielding weight, pressed into his torn back, its splinters digging into his wounds, and Jesus fell once more, his body betraying him under the strain, his breath ragged with exhaustion. The soldiers lashed him with their whips, the leather cracking through the air, demanding he rise, but his knees buckled, refusing to obey. Oh, how their cruelty must have burned in the hearts of those who loved him. Longinus the centurion watched closely, his seasoned eyes familiar with the sight of broken men, men whose spirits had crumbled under the weight of pain. He'd seen countless prisoners collapse, defeated by the empire's relentless cruelty, their eyes empty of hope. But Jesus, there was something different about him, something that set him apart, defouetted. Never there was a fire in him, a strength that no whip or nail could extinguish, a divine resolve that seemed to radiate from his very being. Longinus, stirred by something he couldn't yet name, a flicker of awe perhaps, or a whisper of truth, acted swiftly. Spotting a man in the crowd, a stranger from the countryside named Simon, he barked with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "You there, pick up that cross." Simon hesitated, his eyes wide with fear, then stepped forward, hoisting the heavy blood-stained beam onto his shoulders. Jesus, with excruciating effort, raised himself, his body screaming in protest, his eyes meeting Simon's in a moment that felt like eternity. Even in his exhaustion, Jesus offered a glance so full of gratitude, it seemed to pierce the stranger's soul, the silent thank you that spoke of a love beyond comprehension. Can you fathom such grace in the face of such suffering? How could a man so broken still give so much? The death march pressed on a grim procession, winding through Jerusalem's narrow, crowded streets, witnessed by a city torn between scorn and sorrow. Women lined the path, their wails rising like a mournful chorus, their tears falling like rain for the man they knew as teacher, healer, savior. Jesus, bleeding and weary his every step, a battle against collapse turned to them, his voice steady despite the pain that racked his body. "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me." He said, his words carrying a compassion that silenced their sobs for a moment. "Weep for yourselves and your children." Oh, what boundless love. Even as he walked to his death, his heart was with others, his thoughts on their future, their salvation. Longinus overheard those words, and something deep within him stirred again, a tremor in the fortress of his soul. Who was this man who, even on the brink of death, could think of others, could offer such wisdom, such care? The question gnawed at him, growing louder with every step toward Golgotha, each footfall bringing him closer to a truth he could feel but not yet grasp. At last they reached that dry, desolate hill, a place of horror known as the skull, where the air itself seemed to carry the stench of death. The three crosses stood ready, their stark, splintered outlines a chilling promise of agony, their shadows stretching across the barren ground like grim sentinels. The soldiers set to work with grim efficiency, their movements practiced, their faces hardened by years of such tasks. But Jesus, he didn't resist. He didn't curse or plead, didn't lash out at his tormentors. He stretched out his arms as if offering himself willingly, surrendering to the cross with a purpose only he fully understood, a divine mission that shone through his pain. Then came the moment that would haunt all who witnessed it, a moment that would echo through the ages. A soldier pinned Jesus' arm to the rough wood, the grain biting into his torn skin. Another raised a hammer, its iron head gleaming in the dim light. The first nail drove through flesh, a sickening crunch that tore a cry from Jesus' lips, a sound that sank into the heavens and broke the hearts of those who loved him. Mary shuddered, her body racked with grief, her hands clutching at John as if to anchor herself against the pain. John turned away, his eyes unable to bear the sight, his heart heavy with helpless sorrow. The crowd murmured, some weeping openly, their tears mingling with the dust, while others mocked, their voices sharp with cruelty, as the hammer fell again and again, each blow a wound to the soul of Golgotha. Longinus stood motionless, his face a mask of discipline, his spear gripped tightly in his hand, but inside a storm was brewing, a tempest of doubt and wonder that threatened to unravel everything he thought he knew. The soldiers raised the crosses, struggling under their weight, the wood groaning as they forced them upright. Jesus' cross sank into its hole with a heavy, bone-jarring thud, his body jolting violently from the impact, his wounds tearing open further. The two criminals crucified beside him screamed in agony, their voices raw with despair, their bodies twisting in futile resistance. One of them, his face twisted with contempt, glared at Jesus and sneered, "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us while you're at it?" His words dripped with bitterness, a last act of defiance. But the other criminal, his voice weak yet sincere, rebuked him with a strength born of newfound faith. "Don't you fear God?" He gasped, his breath labored. "We're getting what we deserve, but this man, he's done nothing wrong." Then turning to Jesus, his eyes filled with a desperate hope, he whispered, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus, his breath shallow, his body racked with pain, replied with a promise that echoed through eternity, a promise that carried the weight of salvation. "Truly I tell you today, you will be with me in paradise." Can you feel the weight of those words, the hope they kindled in a dying man's heart? Longinus, stationed at his post, couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had overseen countless executions, watched men beg and curse until their last breath. their voices fading into the wind. But this was different, utterly unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. Jesus' words weren't of pain or defeat. They were of hope, of forgiveness, of a kingdom beyond the reach of Rome's iron grip. Time seemed to freeze as the sunlight faded, a thick veil of darkness, cloaking the land, as if the heavens themselves mourned the loss of their son. Longinus kept his eyes fixed on Jesus hanging there, still speaking, despite the suffering that tore at his body. "Father, forgive them," Jesus said, his voice steady, resonant with a love that defied comprehension, "for they do not know what they are doing." A shiver ran through Longinus's chest, a jolt that reached the very core of his being. Forgiveness for the soldiers who whipped him, who drove nails through his hands, for the crowd that mocked him, their voices like daggers, for Longinus himself, who stood ready to ensure his death, his spear a silent threat. Oh, how those words pierced his heart, how they burned like a sacred fire. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm brewing, as if the heavens themselves wept for the tragedy unfolding. Caiaphas and the religious leaders, smug with satisfaction, their robes billowing as they turned and left their hearts untouched by the scene before them. But Mary stayed, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces, held gently by John, whose own grief was a mirror of her own. Jesus, his strength fading, his breath coming in shallow gasps, looked at them with eyes that still held love, even in his final moments. "Woman, behold your son," he said to Mary, his voice weak but clear, a gift of care amidst his pain. Then to John he said, "Behold your mother." Even as death loomed, he thought of those he loved, ensuring they would not be alone. But his body was failing, the weight of the cross and the nails too much to bear. Suddenly a cry tore from his lips, raw and desperate, a plea that shook the heavens. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Some in the crowd misunderstood their whispers, buzzing with confusion, thinking he called for Elijah, hoping for a miraculous rescue, a prophet descending from the skies. A bystander ran, soaked a sponge with vinegar, and raised it to Jesus' lips on a reed, but Jesus refused it, his face set with resolve. He would accept no comfort. His sacrifice had to be complete, untainted by relief. Can you imagine such resolve? Such unwavering commitment to his purpose? A solemn silence fell over Golgotha, heavy with anticipation, as if the world itself held its breath. Jesus lifted his gaze, his eyes fixed on the heavens, knowing the end was near, his mission almost complete. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he cried out, "It is finished." The words rang out, a declaration of victory, a triumph over sin and death that echoed across the ages. Then one final time he raised his eyes to the sky, his voice a whisper of surrender and trust. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." With that he bowed his head and died. Oh, what a moment, what a heart-stopping, earth-shattering moment. The earth itself answered, trembling with a violent earthquake that shook Jerusalem to its core, the ground heaving as if in mourning. Rocks split apart, tombs burst open, and the temple veil tore in two from top to bottom, as if God himself had rent it in grief, proclaiming the new covenant forged by his son's sacrifice. The crowd fell silent, their mocking faces now pale with terror, their hearts struck by the realization of what they'd done. Many beat their chests, their wails rising in a chorus of regret, the weight of their actions crashing down upon them. And Longinus, he dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, his heart laid bare before the truth he could no longer deny. Words spilled from his lips before he could stop them, his voice trembling with awe and conviction. Truly, this man was the Son of God. Can you believe it? The centurion who'd overseen the crucifixion, who'd stood as Rome's enforcer, his hands stained with the blood of countless executions, became the first Gentile to proclaim Jesus as the Christ. His voice, though shaken, carried a certainty that would not be silenced, a confession that marked the beginning of a new journey. A heavy silence draped Golgotha like a shroud, the air thick with the weight of what had just occurred. Jesus' body hung lifeless, the light gone from his eyes, his sacrifice complete. The soldiers, unnerved by the quake and the crowd's growing unrest, began to withdraw, their faces uneasy, their confidence shaken. The people, confused and afraid, scattered, their hearts heavy with the memory of what they'd seen, their minds wrestling with questions they couldn't yet answer. It was the day before Passover, and Jewish law forbade leaving bodies on crosses during the Sabbath, a sacred time that demanded purity. The leaders, eager to uphold tradition, went to Pilate requesting the legs of the crucified be broken to hasten their deaths, ensuring no desecration of the holy day. The order reached Longinus, and he gave the command without hesitation, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. Soldiers grabbed a heavy iron bar, its weight a grim promise of pain, and approached the thieves crucified beside Jesus, shattering their legs with brutal bone-crunching force, their screams piercing the air. But Jesus Longinus knew he was already gone. His body still, his spirit departed. Still, Roman law demanded certainty, a final act to confirm a death. Taking his spear, Longinus approached the cross, his steps heavy, his heart pounding with a mix of duty and reverence. With a swift, practiced thrust, he pierced Jesus' side, the spear slicing through flesh with a precision honed by years of battle. From the wound flowed blood and water, a sight that struck Longinus like a thunderbolt, stopping him in his tracks. John, standing nearby, his face streaked with tears, would later write of this moment, bearing solemn witness to its truth. His words a testament to the reality of what he'd seen. Longinus stared at the wound, then at his spear, now stained with that sacred blood, its crimson gleam a stark contrast to the dull iron. Unknowingly, he'd fulfilled a prophecy. They will look on him whom they have pierced. The blood and water, a symbol of redemption and purification. A sign of the new life offered through Jesus' sacrifice, fell upon his face, some say even touching his eyes. Tradition holds that Longinus suffered from an ailment that clouded his vision, dimming the world around him. But in that moment, as the sacred mixture touched his eyes, his sight was restored. The veil lifted from his eyes in more ways than one. Can you imagine the awe that flooded his soul? The clarity that washed over him? There at the foot of the cross, beneath a sky still weeping with storm clouds, Longinus finally understood. The man he'd been ordered to kill was no ordinary man, no mere rebel or teacher. He was the Son of God, the Savior, whose love had conquered even death, whose sacrifice had opened the gates of eternity. That moment reshaped Longinus' life, turning a soldier of Rome, a man forged in violence and obedience, into a servant of Christ, his heart ablaze with a new purpose. Oh, what a transformation! What a miracle born in the shadow of the cross. From that day, he carried the truth of what he'd seen, proclaiming it with a zeal that could only come from witnessing the greatest act of love the world had ever known, a love that reached even him, a centurion who'd once stood as an instrument of death. His story, born in the sorrow and glory of Golgotha, would echo through the ages, a testament to the power of a single moment that changed everything. A moment that showed the world what love could endure, what faith could achieve, what a heart transformed could become. Can you hear the call of that moment, the whisper of a love that refuses to be silenced? Will you let it change you as it changed Longinus forever? Oh, what a seismic shift rocked Longinus' soul as he stood at the foot of that blood-stained, splintered cross on that fateful day in Jerusalem. Can you even begin to imagine the weight of his realization? The earth-shattering truth that crashed over him like a tidal wave. He hadn't just executed a rebel, some troublesome preacher stirring up the crowds. He'd thrust his spear into the side of the Son of God, the Savior of the world. His knees buckled under the weight of that truth, and he fell to the ground. Not as the proud iron-willed centurion he'd been for years, but as a believer, his heart cracked open, forever changed by what he'd witnessed. Oh, how his world must have spun in that moment. The Holy Scriptures may not capture every heartbeat that followed every step of his journey, but the stories whispered through ancient writings and church tradition paint a vivid, breathtaking picture of what came next. Longinus, shaken to his very core, couldn't just march back to the Roman camp, dust off his armor, and pretend nothing had happened. How could he when the image of Jesus, silent and still hanging on that rugged cross, burned in his mind like a sacred fire that refused to fade, its flames licking at the edges of his soul? Sleep fled from him night after night as those haunting moments from Golgotha replayed in vivid detail, Jesus' words soft yet piercing, his gaze steady and compassionate, his unshakable calm in the face of unimaginable suffering. Could he ever unsee such a thing? Could anyone? Longinus' world, once a fortress ruled by orders, obedience, and the clash of steel, began to crumble like sand beneath his feet. How could he follow Rome's commands now, knowing what he'd witnessed, knowing the truth that had seared itself into his heart? Was he serving justice, honor, and truth? Or was he merely a pawn of a blind, ruthless empire that crushed anything in its path? The questions gnawed at him, relentless like a storm battering the walls of his mind. Then, as if the city itself couldn't contain the news, rumors swept through Jerusalem like wildfire spreading from alley to marketplace. Whispers that Jesus' tomb stood empty, its stone rolled away. Some claimed they'd seen him alive walking among them, his presence as real as the sun in the sky. Can you imagine the stir those words caused, the hope and confusion they sparked? Longinus listened in silence, his face unreadable. But every word struck deep, igniting a spark in his soul, a flame that grew brighter with each passing moment. He didn't doubt it, not for a second. No, something within him, a quiet, powerful certainty like a whisper from the divine, told him that death hadn't held Jesus, that the grave couldn't contain the Son of God. For days he wandered in turmoil, the scenes from Golgotha replaying like a holy vision, each moment etched into his heart, with a clarity that both haunted and sustained him. Jesus' words, every one a treasure, forgiveness, love, redemption. His glances, filled with a compassion that seemed to see into the depths of Longinus' soul. His silences, heavy with purpose. While Jerusalem returned to its daily grind, its markets bustling, and its streets alive with chatter, Longinus couldn't go back. How could he return to being the iron-hearted centurion forged in violence and bloodshed, when his heart now beat with a new rhythm, one set by the cross? His heart, once a fortress of discipline, cold and unyielding, began to crack its walls, giving way to something new, something alive. When he heard the stories of Jesus alive, seen by his followers, he felt no skepticism, no confusion, only a profound, unshakable truth that settled deep within him. Yes, Jesus had conquered death. Oh, what a revelation! What a moment of blinding clarity! For the first time, Longinus understood faith not as a distant concept, not as a ritual or a rule, but as a living force, a fire that burned away doubt and fear. He grasped the weight of the cross not just as wood and nails, but as the instrument of salvation, the bridge between humanity and God. He saw the miracle of forgiveness, the staggering, world-altering power of redemption that flowed from Jesus' sacrifice. At last, he saw it all clearly, as if the scales had fallen from his eyes. With a courage born of conviction, a strength that surpassed even his years as a warrior, he made a choice that would echo through history, a choice that would redefine his very existence. He resigned his post, shedding his gleaming armor, its weight no longer a source of pride, but a reminder of a life he could no longer live. He handed back his sword, its blade once an extension of his will, now a relic of a past he was leaving behind. Can you picture it, the sheer audacity of it? A Roman centurion, a man of power and prestige, commander of legions, turning his back on the mightiest empire on earth, walking away from everything he'd known. Without a glance behind, he left the army and stepped into a journey of faith, his soul ablaze with a purpose so pure it shone like a beacon in the darkness. Longinus sought out the disciples, those who'd walked with Jesus, who'd heard his teachings and seen his miracles, and he began learning from the very man he'd once helped crucify. Can you imagine the humility it took, the courage to approach those who'd known Jesus, to sit at their feet and soak in the truth, his name? Longinus spread among the first believers, a whisper of awe and wonder, a story that carried the weight of transformation. The centurion who'd once led legions for Rome, who'd marched under the eagle banner with unwavering loyalty, now walked barefoot through dusty roads, his heart burning with a passion that could not be contained, proclaiming a king he'd helped send to the cross. Oh, what a transformation! What a testament to the power of grace. For years he traveled through the regions of Cappadocia and Caesarea in modern-day Turkey, his voice ringing with the name of Jesus, a name that carried life and hope. I watched him die. He'd declare, his eyes alight with conviction, his words trembling with the weight of what he'd seen. Yet in his death I found life. His testimony wasn't just words, it was a thunderbolt, a lightning strike that pierced hearts and awakened souls. He didn't speak from rumors or secondhand tales, from stories passed down through others. He'd been there at the foot of the cross, his hands stained with the blood of the Savior, his eyes witness to the darkness that fell, the earth that quaked, the veil that tore. His story moved hearts, stirring souls to faith, drawing them to the light of Christ. The hand that once gripped a sword, steady and lethal, now boldly raised the gospel, a weapon far mightier, its power rooted in love and truth. Can you feel the power of his words, the way they must have resonated in the hearts of those who heard him? Longinus wasn't just any preacher, not just another voice in the growing chorus of believers. He was the centurion who'd stood at Golgotha, who'd seen the sky darken as if the heavens mourned, who'd felt the earth quake in response to Jesus' death, who'd heard his final cry that shattered the silence. His presence alone was a testament to the truth, his very existence, a living proof of the resurrection. Many believed because of him, their hearts opened by the raw honesty of his story, by the undeniable conviction in his voice. But Rome. Oh, Rome didn't take kindly to those who defied its iron grip, who dared to turn their backs on its authority. Persecution shadowed Longinus like a storm, its clouds gathering with every step he took. He was arrested, dragged before interrogators, whose eyes burned with suspicion, beaten with fists and rods, and threatened with death, their voices harsh with demands. They offered him freedom. A simple trade denied Christ, renounced this dangerous faith, and returned to the empire's fold. But Longinus, with a peace that only truth can bring, stood firm, his heart anchored in the moment he'd seen Jesus on the cross. Can you imagine his resolve, the strength that flowed from his faith? His faith was unshakable, forged in the fire of that dark Friday, tempered by the truth he'd witnessed. Condemned as a traitor, the empire that had trained him as a soldier, that had shaped him into a weapon of its will, now prepared to execute him, to silence the voice that dared to speak of a higher king. They led him to a lonely hill outside the city, the ground beneath his feet as unforgiving as the empire he'd left behind. There, under a vast windswept sky, Longinus was beheaded. His life ended by the same Rome he'd once served. Oh, what a moment, what a poignant echo of the cross. He died not in fear, not with a heart heavy with regret, but with his eyes lifted to heaven, his spirit soaring, echoing the one he'd watched on the cross, whose final words had been a surrender to God. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Longinus' death was not an end, but a beginning, a martyrdom that sealed his place in the story of faith. His body was laid to rest in Cappadocia, and soon local Christians began to venerate him, their voices raised in awe and gratitude. Miracles and healings were reported at his tomb. Can you believe the power of his legacy? The way it continued to touch lives, his name once tied to violence, to the spear that pierced the Savior's side, became a beacon of faith, a symbol of redemption. No longer an executioner, Longinus was a witness, a believer, a martyr, his life a testament to the transformative power of Christ's love. Through the centuries, the Church recognized him as Saint Longinus, the one who saw, who believed, who died for the one who first died for him. Oh, how his story shines a radiant light in the tapestry of faith, but he wasn't alone in this divine mission, this movement that would reshape the world. Have you heard of Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James? These 12 men, ordinary in their origins, yet chosen by God, carried a message that shook the foundations of empires. From Jerusalem's dusty, sun-baked streets to the farthest corners of the earth, they proclaimed a truth powerful enough to challenge kings, topple temples, and split history in two. Can you grasp the magnitude of their courage, the audacity of their mission? They had no armies, no swords, no political allies, just faith in what they'd seen in the Jesus who'd walked with them, died for them, and risen again. Their words, backed by sacrifice, conquered hearts and nations, planting seeds that would grow into a faith that endures to this day. Oh, what a legacy they left. What a fire they kindled. You have to see the story unfold in the Apostles, a film that captures their journey, their struggles, their triumphs. This isn't just the tale of a church, it's the saga of 12 men who stood against the most powerful empire in history, who faced persecution, torture, and death, and yet changed the world with nothing but their faith and the sacrifices they made. Longinus, alongside them, became part of this unstoppable movement, his life a vivid, powerful testament to the transformative power of the cross. From a spear-wielding centurion, a man shaped by violence and duty, to a martyr for Christ, his journey reminds us that one moment, one encounter with truth can rewrite a life in history itself. Can you feel the fire of that truth burning, still calling out across the ages? Will you let it touch your heart as it touched Longinus and set your soul ablaze with purpose? His story is a challenge, a beacon, a promise that no one is too far gone, no heart too hard to be transformed by the love of the one who died on that cross. Oh, what a story, what a savior, what a legacy that lives on. Oh, the story of Longinus' transformation at the foot of the cross hits me like a thunderbolt, stirring a fire in my soul. It screams a truth I can't ignore. Life's deepest meaning lies in embracing a purpose beyond ourselves, one rooted in love and sacrifice. Longinus' journey from a hardened soldier to a martyr, ablaze with faith, shows me that no heart is too calloused, no life too entrenched to be changed by a single earth-shattering moment of truth. This isn't just a tale from ancient Jerusalem. It's a call to live with courage and conviction. Today, I'm struck by how Longinus shed his armor, his status, his entire world to follow a higher calling. In our fast-paced, self-centered society, where we're often chasing fleeting success or validation, his choice challenges me to question, what am I holding on to that keeps me from a life of true purpose? His story fuels my belief that we need to prioritize compassion over power, faith over fear, and community over isolation. It's a reminder to stand up for what's right, even when the world, be it an empire or modern pressures, demands conformity. Socially, I feel a burning need for us to foster spaces where transformation is possible, where people can encounter love and truth without judgment. Longinus' redemption shows that everyone deserves a chance to change no matter their past. Let's build communities that uplift, not tear down, and live with the boldness to defy systems that crush the human spirit. Oh, how I long for a world where we, like Longinus, can drop to our knees in awe and rise with hearts set on something greater.